Hello everybody, this is Albert with Green Tea House. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to talk about what is Russian tea. Now before we begin, I highly recommend you check out our back catalog of episodes, and I'll make sure I put some that are germane to this episode up here. So what is Russian tea? We do have a series of episodes here on, I guess you could call it geographic teas. What is English tea? What is Turkish tea? And I thought it'd be good to talk about Russian tea because Russian tea has a very unique history. So Russia, as you guys know, borders China. So there's been a long history with China regarding the West when it comes to tea. And really, you think about it, Russia was the first country in the West to interact with tea culture. We talked about in that episode 4,500 years of tea history in 10 minutes. That really was the Portuguese and later the Dutch that were the first Westerners to bring back tea to the West. And this is really in the early 1600s. And this is roughly about the same time that the Russians had exposure to tea too. And then it just took over the West, whether you were Portugal or England or the Netherlands or anywhere, Russia included. So tea is exceedingly popular in Russia. It is exceedingly popular. And you can understand, given the climate, why this would be. So the history behind Russian tea is pretty simple. Given that there is a large boundary with China, going back to the 1600s, there were what we call the camel caravans that used to carry tea from China to Russia. And Russia first got introduced to it through a series of treaties. And part of the treaties, or the tribute, was they would give Russia the Russian emperors, the Romanovs, the early Romanovs, so we're looking like 1600s, some tea. And the Romanovs at the beginning are like, why are you giving me these dry tea leaves? What am I going to do with this? They're like, trust me, it's going to change your life. And it changed the entire country. So in those early caravans, I mean, you're thinking a very long distance from central China all the way through Mongolia, all the way to Siberia, into the European side of Russia. And so this was done by camels. And so you look really as right from the 1600s, it was really early, but the peak camel caravan, similar to the cutters that used to bring tea from China as fast as they could to the West, really the peak was in the 1850s. But this was old school. This was camels. It would take forever. And so one of the reasons that black tea was probably the most popular of the teas that were imported to Russia is because we know that black tea, even though black tea historically is not an old tea, this is something that people don't realize. I think the innovations of black tea came really later in the 16 and 1700s in China. Prior to that, it was mostly green tea and pu'er tea, oolongs, I should say. It was mostly oolongs and pu'ers that were really brewed in China going back to the ancient times. So one of the ways that the tea was sent to Russia was in bricks, in cakes. And we've talked about that on the episodes on pu'er, how it was very common in the old days prior to the Ming Dynasty for tea, whether it be oolong or whatever form, to be shipped in cakes, in birds' nests, in bricks. Probably because it was just easier to ship it, right? You could just stack these cakes on top of each other. And because it was commonly used as currency, and it was just a better form. Because you think about it, if you have loose leaf tea in a bag and the bag cuts, all this tea's coming out and it gets stuck in the dirt, where bricks were just easier to use. And so bricks were the common mode, I guess you could say, of tea consumption up into the Ming Dynasty, where the Ming emperors finally said loose leaf tea was the norm. And then so you saw in the 1600s really loose leaf tea, and since then it's been loose leaf tea up until the tea bag revolution of the 1920s, 1930s. And then you still have some holdouts like pu'er, which is still done in bricks and cakes. Either way, the camels would take the tea to Russia. And so even today, when you think of Russian tea, you're going to think strong black tea. And in fact, they have a tea blend that's named after them called Russian Caravan. And Russian Caravan is mostly going to be Keeman, which is, I would say, a pretty strong black Chinese tea. And then the other 2/4 of it are going to be kind of a roasted oolong, so like a dark oxidized oolong. And then the other 1/4 of it's going to be lapsang souchong, which is one of my favorites. It's not that popular, I would say. It's definitely popular among tea drinkers and in China, but lapsang souchong is a very smoky black tea. In fact, the way they prepare it is that they expose the tea leaves to smoke. So it has a very, very smoky taste. So this is the Russian Caravan. So when you think of Russian tea, you're going to think black tea, strong black tea. The other thing that when you think about Russian tea is that the samovar. The samovar is the classic teapot that has been used in Russian tea culture for hundreds of years. And because of the expansion of the Russian Empire, it's still common to see this in Central Asia among the Turks and also in Eastern Europe. And the samovar, for instead of just going through the kind of the mechanics of how it works, essentially it dispenses a very strong diluted black tea. And so when it's served in this diluted form, it's got a little spigot on the bottom, the people that are drinking the tea can determine how strong they want the tea. So you can have like a little of the dilute and then mix it with other things, or you can make it very, very strong. So the samovar, along with the podstekenik, which is like kind of the classic Russian cup to drink it in, just like we talked about in the episode on Turkish tea. The Turks have their own unique glass that they drink from, the hourglass where you hold the top. The Russians have historically their own unique cup and their own unique tea kettle called the samovar. Now, if you go into the typical Russian household today, most people are not going to have a samovar, but this is kind of one of those things that's a throwback to history. So going back to the camel caravans, these really ended in the 1850s, and these are very nostalgic and very kind of imprinted in the Russian culture. But with the advent of the Trans-Siberian Railroad in the 1850s, the caravan was no longer needed by camels because now it's the trains that do it. And so tea consumption in Russia is gigantic, it's humongous. And they typically, similar to Turkish tea, are going to drink it with just sugar. But there's some areas of Russia that will do milk and sugar as well. So you're going to see some varieties, but similar to kind of like with Turkish tea, it's going to be the strong black tea, similar to Turkish tea, and then with some sugar. So in closing, what is Russian tea? Russian tea is going to be a blend of blacks historically served in a samovar with sugar. Guys, post in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care. God bless.